Cars is truly the weakest franchise that has been ever made when concerning Pixar, and that is simply a fact. There's just nothing that has been done that can be said is compelling like the other films like Toy Story or Monsters that have better messages overall, but it doesn't mean it is completely bad. Because looking back on it, the Cars franchise, despite being more flawed in many ways, still manages to have fun and powerful moments that you can connect with in that very realm. And I just decided that I want to add on to the fact that Cars really isn't a bad franchise at all when you look into it and ignore that Cars 2 even existed. Because on this channel, I've already made it clear I hate the film and think it belongs in one of the worst animated sequels ever made, but the idea of Cars overall isn't bad, and there still is some fun to be enjoyed that should have logically continued with Cars and Cars 3 instead. I mean, when you compare it to other stories like Toy Story or Bug's Life or Monsters Inc., you sort of get exactly why they are alive, where compared in the case of Cars, the moment you start to think about it, it literally gets more confusing instead. I mean, you don't at first, but when you start extending that idea along with what Cars 2 did to involve a completely separate different plot, you start to question the concept of the world itself, and that is something you don't want to do. I mean, of course the main focus is on the film itself, but when you take the franchise to new heights and show them doing things that normally humans would do, it becomes a little weird to think about it compared to inanimate objects that actually have hands and feet that make it more believable and interacting with the human world itself. So in those instances, you can see why it is bad, because Cars 2 was bad, literally an awful movie with no purpose to it whatsoever and the actual story that they were trying to build. But then you have to dial back that thought to the overall story with Cars and Cars 3, the story of Lightning McQueen. Because when we take a look back at the story, we look at a place where cars are in their most natural element, which would be in fact racing, one of the main purposes of their existence. The actual reason for Cars to exist as a franchise is more of the love letter to racing and the other thrills that cars provide that so many people love, the highways and the small towns we think of that we use on a daily basis that makes up for a fun adventure, and it's why I think we love it despite its numerous flaws, still having a good story in my opinion to see that journey of an arrogant racer. I just love the introduction of the movie with the flashing lights and roaring engines that really settle in the stage of what the movie world was all about. The hustle and bustle of racing that I never gravitated towards myself at any point in my life, but was given a reason to be enthralled by the world with what Cars brought to the table and characters like Lightning McQueen or Chick Hicks. This showed a clear passion for this world that was extended into an emotional journey as the movie went along and helped Lightning's character to grow from an arrogant, selfish racer who wanted to win the Piston Cup and the Dynaco sponsorship, where those very small details makes the story stand out to be more appreciated in the franchise. This leads us to discover towns like Radiator Springs and the famous Route 66, one of the original highways in the US that symbolizes escape, loss, and a hope for a new beginning. The path to the future and the passion for cars that this country has, and discovering how it became forgotten over time when new things popped up, like how Radiator Springs got left as a small town nobody actually wanted to go. Because when I was young and wanted to learn more about behind the scenes that went into making these films, I really understood John Lasseter's love of cars when they visited locations on Route 66 to serve as inspiration for the town, and the interesting car references they put into the mountain landscapes and other things in the film. Like, they truly went out to make a world that was attributed to that very passion of cars itself. It was also strengthened by characters like Doc Hudson, who was a famous race car in his time, but now became a town judge who wants nothing to do with cars like Lightning, but then has to force him to repave the road in that very process. And I like this plot because of the change he experiences to work together with other cars that he refused at the beginning, and learning the background of each of the residents, making friends with Mater and Sally, and actually fixing things for the better to give the town a new fresh hope. Everything about this film worked because it paid tribute to the whole world and the people who built it, from the roads to cars themselves, which really completed his whole entire journey when he chooses to sacrifice a win to save another racer, where everyone actually praised him instead of an arrogant race car that won off the back of good sportsmanship and recklessness. And that's why Cars is a delightful film on its own. I mean, it's certainly not the strongest or able to stand out as much as the other Pixar films of this era, but it does show the passion and love for what it wanted to see, and that's why I think it wasn't a bad idea to start with that journey, the one we would see continue in Cars 3, but unfortunately they didn't do that in Cars 2. Like I keep saying, Cars 2 remains to be an abomination in Pixar's catalog, one of the worst sequels that have been ever made, and nothing has changed that view. Everything you find conceptually bad about Cars comes from this very film and its need to focus on Tow Mater instead of Lightning McQueen for some reason, where this comes from the same guy who directed the first film, and that hardly makes sense. This is something that should have been kept as those Mater tall tales, or something that would would have been better reworked into that Cars on the Road series that came out recently, which is actually really enjoyable and doesn't actually affect things for the worse like Cars 2 did. Putting Mater in these weird unrealistic situations really doesn't help the franchise other than the fact that you can sell merchandise with it, which to be fair in that case it actually makes it a good thing for the franchise overall if you think about the real details that Disney would actually care about. But beyond that, in a storytelling trilogy, it is still batshit insanely horrible. I feel nothing when I watch this movie, and I really mean that. And it would have been better served if the focus was on the world tour in the prime time of Lightning McQueen's career. That would have made Cars 3 a lot better in a film in that regard too. But the fact remains how they focus on a racing franchise into a spy one like James Bond for some reason with the comic relief as its main character instead, which really doesn't add up and makes you question the logic of the world and how they run on things, considering that the main villain has this stupid plan of making everyone go back to traditional fuel while posing a facade of transitioning to alternatives as a billionaire while blowing up race cars for some reason to prove that point. Like, it really doesn't make any sense, and it makes you look stupid considering you found success in this area and wanted to expand your business rather than sticking to one that the plot of the movie just wants you to do. The problem just keeps piling up in this film and it doesn't stop. I mean, to be fair to Cars 2 credit, it is fun and interesting to take a look at those other facets of Cars' life, but yeah, it still doesn't work or make any sense in the overall trilogy. There are just so many physical limitations that really doesn't suggest that they would be able to have any of the things that they are doing, and the majority of newly introduced characters that don't really matter to the overall story when you get into the next film. It's stupid and I hate talking about everything about it other than the fact it's dumb fun, because it is profoundly stupid and it has nothing to say or do with the concept of the series itself and makes it look bad rather than better. And that's a sad fact because it kind of affected the quality of Cars 3. Not that it's bad, but it's not as good as the first one in my opinion because of the effects of 2. But that doesn't mean story-wise I still enjoy it more because it went back to the core ideals of what Cars was about and the respect it had for that world continuing on at the end of Lightning's era and ushering in the next. It was also very heartwarming to see Doc Hudson flashbacks in the film that really tie in with the overall theme of Cars that was missing from before. Not that anything could be done because Paul Newman passed away before Cars 2 released, but I still felt like this actually connected to what Cars had and its characters from before compared to the detour of Cars 2 adding things that wouldn't be seen again. This time you really get to know McQueen better and go through the struggles he has at this stage in life and gives a proper amount of time required for other characters like Mater or new ones like Cruz instead of making them the central focus for no reason at all. I mean, if it was just this film and Cars, then I think many people would have accepted it overall as a good franchise instead because it is about racing. Now that still doesn't make it as strong or compelling as the other ones that have a more realistic connection to the human world, but the story of Cars does take an interesting look at the thrills and emotions about why we love Cars to begin with. And at the very least, these movies, especially Cars 2, have something to say about the purpose of what Cars has to offer in the world of sport or travel, the roads of opportunity that may present itself in life. And that is something I really loved about these films in the first place. I mean, although it might not seem compelling or overall interesting, Cars still has a lot of fun to it that remains that I have held in high regard since I first saw the movies and still do. That doesn't suggest it being completely bad, and I really cannot find myself hating all of it on the whole. And of course, even though Cars on the Road might have some moments that I'm like and doesn't actually focus on the actual characters after the world of Cars 3, I still have fun with the adventures that Mater and Lightning McQueen go on these journeys of where they wanted to take the story next. I mean, yes, it might be bad in terms of overall concepts and the overall logic of the world itself, but I appreciate what sort of passion they put into the world that was clearly different from all of the other Pixar films to actually involve humanoids in some form, to take something unique with the love of automobiles or planes or trains and whatever form of transportation that we use to get around every day. The backbone of society itself that keeps moving us to the future, and we can appreciate for those details. I mean, I really wish I had more to say about it, but I really wanted to keep it short and sweet for something that is quite enjoyable experiences for families and those who just love the thrill of this world and what it has to offer. And with that said, I'm all done, so goodbye.